everyone, and welcome to our session today. So my name is Arwen Griffioen. I manage the machine learning org for Zendesk in Melbourne, Australia. You hopefully can't hear all the birds outside, but it's very early here, so the birds are all singing. My pronouns are she, her. I've been doing this for 6 years in industry now, and prior to that was completing my PhD in machine learning. So we're going to go through, what is it that actually defines a senior scientist in this area, beyond just, that they've been around for a long time. There we go. So just a quick overview. We'll sort of touch on what the levels of scientists are, and then we'll go through 3 key areas that you need to up your game to really be a solid senior, and that's technical, personal, and operational. So in general, in industry, so I'm coming from software engineering industry and machine learning in product specifically. The very entry level would be an associate. This is somebody who perhaps has come out of a boot camp or is a career changer. Perhaps they're coming from statistics or actuarial sciences, something like that. They've got some knowledge gaps. They need some polish. They just, need to fill in the skills a little bit. Then you've got your scientist, right? This is the team member who executes stuff. You give them a piece of work, they get the task done. We have the senior, which is what we're going to focus on today, and they really can be considered the interpreter of the team, right? So they're translating all the conversations in all of the different directions. And then we have senior plus, and I'm just going to call those Sir Thinks-A-Lot. As you go higher and higher, you do less and less hands-on work, and you spend more time contemplating what everybody's going to work on next. So what defines a senior scientist, right? There's one view that says a senior scientist is somebody who has been in a position or has been doing the work for a certain amount of time. And you will often see job ads that are like, oh, you have to have 3 to 5 years experience, productionizing models, working at scale. And that's great, that's fine. But that's not what is really going to make you stand out as a senior scientist. You are technically strong as a senior scientist. At this point, you have been working in the industry for a while. You write solid code, but more importantly, you write the code that's appropriate for the application that you're working on. So you're not over-engineering quick and dirty tests, right, or proof of concepts. But you're not under-engineering your model building pipelines that are going to be out supporting your work in production. You deliver on time. Now, we all know that, especially in more research-based roles, time is a little bit difficult, right? It's pretty hard to estimate correctly when are you going to be able to find the right model? When are you going to be able to solve the problem? When are you going to be able to bring value from machine learning into your problem space? It can be very fast, but it can also be extremely slow. The senior scientist takes all of that into consideration. You're able to reflect on your experience and what's happening in the ML world around you and come up with reasonable time estimates and then stick to them. Stuff happens, deadlines slip, so you can always go and communicate setbacks and negotiate those timelines. And then the last technical strength you have is you know how to select the approach that is right for what you are trying to do, right? So you can look at the problem, you can identify the modeling approaches, the data processing, and the metrics that are going to match the requirement. And this is where we start getting less into hard skills and more into the soft skills. And really, once you get into senior and above, the hard skills become expected. Those, people aren't looking for you to be improving your hard skills. They're looking for you to contribute to the team and the organization with exceptional soft skills. So this is encapsulated by you rise by lifting others. So at this point, you have been mentored, right? We all know the power of mentoring to keep us engaged, to help us improve, and you are giving back to that. So you are stepping in, you're volunteering, you're mentoring your teammates, you're mentoring people outside of your team. Possibly, you're reaching out to local universities or boot camps. You're really putting yourself out there to support the next set of senior scientists. One of the things that really stuck with me when I first became a senior scientist was my boss telling me that a senior scientist's primary job is to make more senior scientists. And mentoring is really a strong way to do that. And you also know you're not perfect yet, so you seek out further mentoring for yourself and further improvement. You're able to self-reflect honestly. So one of the hardest things is to look at yourself and be very honest with yourself about where you're not quite meeting the mark, and also be very honest with yourself about where you are doing really well. Being willing to do the work on yourself, technically, in relationship building, in all aspects of your work, and even in your personal life, this all comes back and makes you a stronger team member. And I think, personally, one of the most important personality traits, so to speak, of a senior is you've replaced your ego with empathy. So you're confident enough in yourself that you don't have to prove that you know everything. You are able to take a step back from conversations and support other members in putting forth their ideas and help them grow that. You actively solicit different viewpoints and don't have to be the center of the solution, right? And so the way you do this is it's not about you, it's about your team. And you go into that with empathy and awareness and create an environment of intellectual safety where ideas can be discussed without fear. We've all heard, or perhaps you haven't, there's a figure of speech called "you can't see the forest for the trees," right? There's so much detail that you can't see the big picture, or you can only see the big picture and you can't see the details. As a manager of an ML team, this is a really key skill. As a senior scientist, you have to understand the big picture. You know that the big picture sets the goal, it sets the vision. But you also know that that vision is not a GPS to get you to it. You know that you have to come up with your own directions to get there. You are ruthlessly pragmatic. This is also, I guess all of these are very important, but this is one that, you know, I really see a lot of people struggle with, where it's very difficult to not explore the exciting new modeling opportunities, right? There's, you know, a new model coming out of Hugging Face and you really think it'd be a lot of fun to work on. But is that the best choice to move forward on coming up with the solution that you are tasked with? So by being pragmatic, you make the choices that are moving forward and maintaining momentum, so that you are building a sense of accomplishment and progress, rather than, you know, sometimes it is fun to go down the rabbit holes of research, but it doesn't necessarily result in a solution. And this is followed by the idea that you understand that questions need answers, not more questions, right? So our primary goal as a scientist is, we have a question. Can we do this? Can we predict this? Can we classify this? Can we extract some valuable information from this data? It's very easy to continue generating questions on top of that, right? Like, oh, well, we've got this data now. What could we do with that? What other stuff could we discover from this? What are the other applications of these models? Rather than focusing on the problem that's in front of you, cataloging all of those ideas and inspirations for things to pursue later, and making sure that you're answering the questions that you have, and only folding in new questions if they're extremely relevant to the problem that you're solving. Now, when we look at this in action, what this comes down to is that you translate that story, you translate that big picture for everyone on the team, okay? So at the beginning of a project, you know, you might have a new project, you're getting new ideas coming through from, you know, your senior plus, your manager, possibly your product partners, possibly your competition. There are new ideas coming from research, papers and conferences, blog posts, open sourced models, and it might be direct feedback. You might already have a product in the, you know, out in the wild, and you're getting a lot of feedback on that from the users. So it really comes to the senior scientist to aggregate those, to bring them all together, to process and organize them so that you can determine if there's questions there to be answered. Are there, is there room for improvement? What are the dependencies between those ideas if we're looking at a new project or a new research direction? Once that has happened, you know, we really rely on a good senior, especially from this point forward, starting with planning and decomposing the work. So we have a big picture. So then we've got to break that down into high-level tasks. You know, if you're in software, this might be epics or features, determining what the order of execution is, and breaking things down into logical steps. This sounds like such a simple thing, but in reality, this is quite a rare skill that needs a lot of practice and mentoring, coaching to develop. The ability to take a big picture, you know, a fancy idea, and break it down into large chunks of stories, right? So take the book and break it into chapters. Once that's happened, then you have to go from these logical steps or high-level tasks, and you have to translate them down into actions, right? Because the people that are actually going to work on this, remember that they're perhaps not as senior as you. Our goal is to make progress and get things moved forward. So you're taking the high-level tasks, you're breaking them down into discrete tasks with clear dependencies and difficulty level, right? So you really want to make sure that you've got a good range of diversity in your difficulty or your complexity of the problem. These tasks could be, testing new models, sourcing new data sets, but they could also be going back and interviewing customers or, working with product partners for clarity. There's a whole research and discovery component around this where to translate it into actions, you have to be able to see what's missing from the story so far and what needs to be filled in. Once you've got this action plan, you have to be able to communicate it, right? We all know that data science and machine learning product is about telling a story. It's about bringing people along with you and explaining at times quite complicated concepts in an accessible manner, right? And this continues within the team when you're taking this very complex vision and you're breaking it down into these discrete tasks without losing that feeling of cohesiveness and story that you're all working towards. So you need to be able to spend the time to clearly communicate with the team and the stakeholders. Make sure that they understand the story, they know where you're going, they're invested in it. Facilitate discussion and alignment so that you're all working in the same direction, but do it, reflecting back to our earlier skills, do it without ego, right? So make sure that the team is really empowered to put their stamp on it, that they have the freedom and the space to fully understand what the goal is and provide feedback on their perspective of how it could be different. And then of course there's the execution, right? Because we have jobs to do. We're supposed to be producing output. You, through your career, have come through the levels. You have been an associate or perhaps a student that needs a great deal of support in getting tasks completed. You've been a scientist who is able to independently execute on those tasks. As then the next level of your career as a senior, you want to work and make sure that the team, that the members that you're working with have the tasks available that fit their skills and experience, but also stretch them that little bit to help them grow. Because remember, the first job of a senior scientist is to make more senior scientists. And then monitoring that, supporting them, encouraging them, unblocking things, right? Making it so that their work is smooth. And of course, you're executing on tasks at the same time. You're not a senior plus who's probably not hands-on in the code so much. You really are executing along with your team. I was trying to find a good quote for this. I decided to quote myself. Good senior scientist is the keystone of any team. So, as a manager, I rely on the partnership with my senior scientist to to translate the story in all directions, right? So the keystone, keystone is an ancient architectural engineering concept where an arch is unstable until the final central keystone is placed. And then that distributed force from the placement of the keystone supports an extremely strong structure. That is the senior scientist, right? They are communicating the progress and the problems of the team upward to, the senior plus and the manager. They are aggregating all of this input, all of the great ideas that are being generated, and then really distilling it into what is able to be accomplished, and sort of identifying flaws and shortcomings and where the strengths of the team can really contribute. So without a solid senior scientist, there's a definite gap in any team that makes it less productive, less supportive than in a team that has one. I would say it's an absolute fundamental requirement. And anything that you can do to develop these skills, through your career as a scientist, you should start accumulating some of this practice, really focusing on this idea of mentoring and reflecting on yourself as the best way to raise yourself up to this level. Because if you can't honestly reflect on yourself, your skills, and your performance, then making this jump is going to be quite difficult. Like I said, when we get to senior, when I'm evaluating a senior, I'm not fussed about your ability to choose metrics or models. I assume those are skills you already have, right? You know how to build models, you know how to predict, you know how to evaluate and monitor these things. What I'm looking for is somebody who can translate the big picture into actions, and somebody who can help me in supporting and growing our more junior members and communicating outward with our stakeholders so that we're all reading the same story and going through the same chapters together. Thank you very much. I am hoping that people will have some questions and some discussion at this point, and would happily take any questions either here, I think, or in our channel.
Yeah, in our channel, we already have some questions. The first question is, Dr. Arwen, at Zendesk, do you have remote internships or associate programs for international students?
Yes. Well, we are a global organization. So Zendesk has offices all around the world. And the machine learning org specifically, we have offices in the US, Europe, and Australia. So we do internship programs once a year. We advertise them on our careers site. And they're usually 6 to 9 months. And it would be local to where you're at. You would require working rights in that region.
Yeah, great. Thank you for answering this. The next question is, in your experience, are tools like Jira Agile well suited for managing and handling data science work? Are there any tools you would recommend for this?
This is a tough one. So software engineering is very much focused on Jira and Agile, and we have struggled and changed through many years to try to work out how to fit that, and they can work. For a science project, I do recommend Jira. And what I would recommend is that you utilize sort of project or epic level cards for the story, right? And then when you're breaking it down into the discrete tasks and ordering, those are your cards, right? And then we have been doing sprints, and I've found it very, very helpful actually to have well-defined 2-week-long tasks. All right, we all know it's really, really easy to spend a lot of time sort of sorting out a model and how it's going to work. So it's really good to put those bounds where there's an expectation of what can be accomplished in 2 weeks, right, in one sprint, and then, you know, that it's done. So for example, you might be looking at a sentiment model, let's say. You need to build a sentiment product for chatbot. That's a pretty standard thing, right? So one set of sprint tasks for a team of 3 might be sourcing public data sets, say source 3 public data sets. For another scientist, it might be source an appropriate internal data set or handcraft an internal data set. It might be, you know, please validate these 3 standard baseline models on the data set, right? So those would be like sort of your sprint tasks. And that's really where the senior comes into their own, is organizing those and making sure they're tied together in a story rather than these sort of disparate tasks.
Yeah,
so it can work, but you have to be very, very diligent about breaking things down discreetly.
Great. The next question. In your opinion, what skills should undergraduate students be working on besides the core hard skills?
Yeah, storytelling is an important one. So that translation from, okay, so in industry, you usually have some sort of product vision, right? And it's this very high level, very North Star, right? Blue sky vision of where you want to get to. That ability to translate that into reality, to take an idea and make it actionable, is something that you can start practicing in undergraduate. You know, and this is a classic like capstone project thing, right? You've got this great idea of what you want to do. You plan it out. You've got this goal, big picture, and then you got to work out how you do it. And that really is the sorts of skills that capstone projects or senior final projects are hoping to instill in people. Start on that early. Besides core hard skills, yeah, look, anything that makes you a well-rounded individual is going to help. But also take advantage of any sort of support that you can provide, be a tutor, facilitate study sessions. Try to really get used to the idea of setting aside ego, right? Because that's really important, especially, you know, when you start working with other seniors.
Great, thank you. The next question is how to work with non-technical managers as a data scientist?
Communication, communication, and communication. So if you have a non-technical manager, the core of data science is uncertainty, right? You can't always give the guarantees that a manager might want. Over communicating, making sure you're taking them through the journey with you. Help them to understand why this ambiguity is present and why it might not be as clearly defined as they envision in their head, right? So this reflects back on the skill of being able to explain complicated concepts to people who aren't in the field. Practice explaining ML to your grandmother or your auntie. See how that goes.
Great. The next question from the Matt Hina. Given the tech changes so often, it would seem a senior must stay fairly conversant with work in the weeds. No? How do you stay conversant with the tech methodologies when coding skills fade with time out of the weeds?
Yeah, so seniors don't necessarily get out of the weeds. So seniors should still be extremely hands-on, executing code. So while the tech changes frequently, fortunately, the coding language, the software and development practices are pretty stable. I recommend, self-learning and team learning, right? So if your job is to make more seniors, one of the tasks is to help everybody stay across what's going on. So ways to do this are to run journal clubs, or paper reading groups within your team, to share blog posts. You don't need to keep track of every paper that's coming out in every research conference, but you do need to be paying enough attention to the area that you know what the broad areas of innovation and approaches are, so that when a problem comes up that fits some new area of research that's come out, you know about it, you can identify it, and then dig in to learn more about it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. The next question is, are there any good trainings, resources, or programs you recommend for building your soft skills as a leader senior?
No, I don't know. Well, I mean, so attending these sorts of talks and conferences where you're getting both technical input, but also this sort of soft skill input. Depending on where you're working at or who your program is with, there are a lot of coaching programs for these, but they're usually run by companies as sort of internal development things. I would recommend, public speaking, going to meetups, organizing meetups, becoming an organizer for some of these things are helpful, and working with, I suppose, your advisor if you're in university, or your manager. Your manager really should be supporting and enabling you to get those trainings.
Great. The next question, how do you keep your hard skills sharp?
By working. Look, you got to read, you got to keep your eye on what's happening. You should always be, even as a scientist, we're not software engineers, but you should always be looking to improve your coding skills, right? Learn about software engineering patterns, learn about a new area. If you're an extremely proficient Python programmer, for example, in machine learning, go play with Scala, go learn a functional program, go, challenge yourself to do something you haven't done before, or that's maybe a little bit outside your comfort zone.
Thank you. The next questions came up. As an early professional right now, how do I know to start applying for senior level positions? Thanks, Dr. Griffioen.
So, for one, if you're looking to go outside of your current position for a senior level, I would say that you should have been talking to your manager now. Like, that should already be a plan once you have settled in. Proactively talk to your manager about, okay, what are the next steps for getting to senior? If that's not happening, and let's be honest, it's not every manager, not every job is going to be the forever job for you. If you're getting bored, if you're not feeling stretched, if you're frustrated by the amount of influence that you have in the team, then it's time to start looking and applying for other jobs. So don't let yourself cruise, because then all your skills are just going to go a bit floppy.
Thank you. The next question. In an interview process, how do you determine that a data scientist is a senior level?
Yeah, so when I'm interviewing, we do coding challenges, we do a live coding session. There's many aspects to it. So when it comes to things like coding challenges or live pairing sessions, I'm looking at, are they asking clarifying questions first? Are they thinking and planning about things before they dive into the code? You know, do they have the hard skills? Do they know the basic libraries in their language of choice and how they function? And it's really about how they think and how they communicate what they're thinking. So for a senior person, that will be a very clear process, right? They'll stop, they'll gather their thoughts, they will clarify anything that needs more information, and then, you know, they'll sort of talk through a high-level plan before they dive in and start executing. And then we ask a lot of behavioral questions and questions about, you know, building relationships within the workplace. And we're looking for the ability to self-reflect, the ability to share negative aspects of themselves where they've then looked back on that and gone, and this is how I've improved, right? You know, when they've made mistakes, that they're able to discuss that without embarrassment, quite honestly, and being like, oh yeah, I totally messed up this one time. And then if I was in that position again, this is how I would handle it differently, or this is how I correct